Chapter 31, Friday, August 7th, 1795. The Confederation of Indian Tribes should have heeded the words of Chief Little Turtle. More than ever, the British alarm over General Mad Anthony Wayne's presence and plans grew. They believed that it was Mad Anthony's plan, if given the least cost, to take Detroit itself. So, in April 1794, Lieutenant Governor John Simcoe of British Canada left Detroit accompanied by an expert staff of Indian engineers, military officers, and engineers. They sailed down the Detroit River and across the western end of Lake Erie, then up the Maumee River to the foot of the large rapids near the site of present-day Waterville, Ohio. There, on the north bank of the river, near the ruins of the old British fort abandoned at the close of the Revolution, and where an Indian agent named Alexander McKee currently maintained a trading post, Simcoe built a fort. This was in strict violation of the British-American Treaty. He named it Fort Miami, after the Maumee River, which was also known as the Miami of the Lake. Almost immediately, there was an influx of Indians to the King's Store in the fort to receive free arms and ammunition for the coming battle. In June, a white renegade named Harry May deserted the Indians and brought word to General Wayne of a force of Indians being led by Blue Jacket to destroy Fort Recovery. Wayne sent a detachment of reinforcements to the fort under Major Buchanan. In the brief battle there, the major was killed, but Mad Anthony had built his fort well and the walls were not breached. After 2 days of fighting, Blue Jacket ordered his men to pick up the dead warriors, and the Indian force left as quickly as it had come. Now it was Wayne's turn to take up the offensive. He led his army north to the Auglaize River and followed the stream down to where it joined the Maumee. Here he built another fort in 8 days, and it was so strong a fort that the general looked at it and said, "I defy the English, Indians, and all the devils in hell to take it." General Charles Scart, standing at Wayne's side, remarked, "Then call it Fort Defiance." And Wayne did so. Harry May, the renegade, was recaptured by the Shawnee and taken to a spot within sight of Fort Miami. For his treachery, death was the only reward. He was tied to a tree and a mark painted on his bare chest. 50 Indians with flintlocks fanned out in a semicircle at a command from Blue Jacket. They all fired simultaneously. No more damage could have been done to May had he been struck full in the breast with an 8-pound cannonball. Wayne continued his march down the Maumee, and at the rapids, in an area where wind down the trees cluttered the ground, the battle was begun, a battle afterwards known as the Battle of Fallen Timbers. It was a severe contest, but it soon became apparent that the Indians had more than met their match. The entire Indian line collapsed, and the warriors began to flee in disorder despite Blue Jacket's rallying cries. They left behind 100 dead Indians. The British garrison in Fort Miami watched the battle in silence. The gate was closed and locked, and they offered no assistance to the Indians, even when they came to the walls and demanded it. With this failure of promised British aid, the Indians lost heart and scattered, and the battle was over. For weeks afterward, Wayne moved about the countryside up and down the length of the Maumee, burning Indian villages and grain fields. Then he marched his army back to Fort Greenville, arriving there on November 2nd. It was a long-awaited victory. Now it was winter, which became a greater foe to the Indians. They had camped at the mouth of Swan Creek, near site of present-day Toledo, Ohio, and were put hard to stay alive. With their fields, goods, and homes destroyed, they now had largely depended upon the British, but now the British didn't help them nearly enough. The defeat and famine were enough to discourage anyone, but even the Indians might have fought on if something hadn't happened which they considered a supernatural omen. To their way of thinking, it was such a portent of evil to come that they resigned themselves to surrendering to the Americans and asking them for more help than they were getting from the British. The incident was indeed a strange one. Of all the white men known by the Confederated Indians, none had so much influence among them or received as much respect from them as Colonel Alexander McKee. It was he, more than anyone else, who had always heretofore made certain that the British lived up to their promises to provide food, firearms, and various goods to them, and when these items did not arrive in time, it was McKee who single-handedly stormed Detroit and demanded the promises be met. The agent was a fierce fighter as well, and few major battles had been fought in which he was not present and at times in the thick of things. Yet never once was he wounded in any way, and this made the Indians believe that he was under the special protection of the Great Spirit. There was further belief that the Great Spirit manifested himself in McKee's pet deer, which followed him about with the devotion of a dog. And then came that morning at home, while he was dressing, when something seemed to come over the animal. As McKee bent over to thrust his leg under his trousers, the fully antlered buck charged and caught him squarely in the rear. It might have been a funny thing, except for the results. The prongs of the antlers plunged deeply into McKee's flesh, and one of them entered his thigh and punctured his huge femoral artery. McKee, who had been sent sprawling, raised himself to a sitting position and with dazed eyes watched his lifeblood drain out to become a wide scarlet puddle on the floor. Within minutes, he was dead. And so, with this seemingly supernatural occurrence to add to their fear and depression, their hunger and need, representatives of the tribe came to Fort Greenville and asked Wayne for peace. The general accepted the offer tentatively, and agreement was made for all the principal chiefs to meet at the fort in the summer to conclude a permanent peace treaty. They came. The Delaware, under Chief Buchanangala, Titibaxti, Pekitilamund, and made up the largest single Indian group, numbering 381 individuals. There were also 240 Potawatomis under Chiefs New Corn, Asmeath, and Son, 180 Wyandot under Chief Tarhi. Blackhuff, Blacksnake, and Blue Jacket came with a party of 143 Shawnee, and Little Turtle arrived solemnly, leading 73 Miami, including 22 Eel River Miami under Chief Lagris. 46 Chippewa attended under Chiefs Massas and Bad Bird, while the 45 Ottawa represented by Chief Ungushaway. A dozen Wees and Pinkashaws came under the leadership of Chief Rentwilko, and 10 Kickapoo and Kashkiakaskis arrived under Chief Kiha. In all, there were 12 tribes represented, totaling 1,130 men. The negotiations were begun at once. The terms dictated by General Wayne made none of the Indians happy. According to the treaty, the Indians would be permitted to retain the privilege of hunting and fishing throughout the Ohio country all the way to the Ohio River, but not across it. The new dividing line between Indian and white territories, however, was to be a line which gave the whites 25,000 square miles of Ohio territory, which is more than half of the whole Ohio country. In addition, the United States would claim 16 tracts within the Indian Territory, each about 6 miles square, for government reservations and the building of forts. For giving up the Ohio land now claimed by the United States, the Indians to receive goods in the value of $1,666 for each of the 12 tribes represented here, plus an annual allowance to each of the tribes of $825 in goods. This was not an easy treaty to agree on. Chief after chief spoke at great length, and at first there were strong opponents. Among them were Blue Jacket, Little Turtle, and Black Snake. But these three were well aware that they had little choice. Better, perhaps, for all the chiefs to sign the document and make the best of it, adhering closely to its limitations, and seeing to it that the whites did the same, thus salvaging some of the land as well as some of their pride. To continue hostilities would be to lose everything. None of them had any doubt of this, and they were tired of war and longed for peace. On August 3rd, all of the chiefs representing the tribes signed the Treaty of Greenville, as did General Mad Anthony Wayne. And today, August 7th, the general gave his farewell address to the Indians. I now fervently pray to the Great Spirit, he said, that the peace now established may be permanent, and that it now holds us together in the bonds of friendship until time shall be no more. I also pray that the Great Spirit above may enlighten your mind and open your eyes to the true happiness, that your children may learn to cultivate the earth and enjoy the fruits of peace and industry. Thus officially, and at long last, ended the Indian Wars in the Northwest Territory. So everyone claimed, at least. Chapter 32. Tuesday, June 26, 1810. The vital spark that had gone out of Blue Jacket when he had slain his own brother Charlie had never returned. And with peace over the land, he retired to his own village where he had spent these past 15 years with his wife Labith. All three of their children had now married and gone their own ways. For the Shawnee, Blue Jacket was happy at the peace and the fact that an Indian might now meet a white man on the trail without fear of constant conflict and potential death. But equally he was sorry for them and for all the Indians, for he knew now with deathless certainty that the words of Puck Sen Wah almost 40 years ago were now true. There could never be an equitable, lasting peace between Indians and whites. It was obvious that sometime in the years ahead another showdown must come between them. Once again, the whites were encroaching in the Indian territories, but Blue Jacket knew this time that if a showdown did come, the Indian forces would not be led by himself. Blue Jacket was dying. His 56-year-old body racked with the dread disease known as cholera, he lay wasting away in his wigwam. Below the low bed, Labith sat on the floor holding his hot, dry hand. For 2 days he had been in and out of his head with delirium, and during all that time she had sat thus, watching him, tending him, moistening his constantly dry mouth. At last she had fallen into an exhausted sleep, and it was then, as death approached, that Blue Jacket had a moment of clarity. He looked over at Labith, still holding his hand, her head leaning against him as she slept, and he smiled. How good a wife she had been, and how much he still loved her. He did not awaken her, but let his mind drift lazily over the many things that had happened during his life. It had been a good life, and he had no wish that he might have lived it in any other way, except that perhaps his efforts on behalf of his people, the Shawnee, might have borne fruit. Perhaps in Tecumseh, the Shawnee might still regain that which they had lost. He remembered clearly the visit he had paid to the son of Puck Sen Wah shortly after the Treaty of Greenville had been concluded. Although Tecumseh had been invited to attend these negotiations, he had refused. The young chief had listened to Blue Jacket tell what had occurred at Fort Greenville, and then he had shaken his head sadly. By the terms of that treaty, the very land upon which Tecumseh's village stood belonged to the whites, and he and his followers would have to vacate themselves. I do not hold with such a treaty, he had told Blue Jacket. Such agreements with whites have always been and always will be wholly worthless. My people and I will remain here until our corn is harvested and our winter hunting completed. Only then, when melting snows swell the river, will we move away into what the whites still consider Indian lands. Tecumseh had paused a long time, and when he had finally spoken again, his voice was low and his words were filled with a great bitterness. My heart, he said, is a stone, heavy with sadness for my people and for my race, cold with the knowledge that no treaty will keep the whites out of our lands, no matter where we move, hard with the determination to resist as long as I live and breathe. Now we are weak, he continued, and many of our people are afraid, but hear me. A single twig breaks easily, but the bundle of twigs is strong. Someday I will journey in all directions, and one by one I will embrace our brother tribes and draw them into a bundle. Then, when we are strong and united, then will we together win our country back from the whites. Again, Blue Jacket smiled as he remembered the intensity with which Tecumseh had spoken. He had nodded slowly his head and replied, "Yes, I think perhaps you will." And now, looking back over what had happened in these years, Blue Jacket thought again that perhaps Tecumseh would do just as he had promised he would. He had visited the tribes to north, south, east, and west, and he had drawn them together in the greatest confederation ever known among Indian nations. The influence he bore now among them was certainly greater than any single Indian had ever held before. War was coming soon, very soon, of that Blue Jacket had no doubt, and possibly, just possibly, Tecumseh was the man who would lead the Indians to complete victory. Blue Jacket sighed faintly and wished that he might have been able to take part in the desperate struggle which lay ahead. He looked over at Wabeeth, and his mouth corners twitched in just the faintest trace of a smile. And then he closed his eyes and died.